special series by SustainaPod Imperial.
In the last episode, we talked to Zanna, George, Xavier, and Tanish about their MIT energy and climate hack. Let's now shift to talking about the university experience and what led you to pursue this path academically.
Could you guys give a brief introduction to your educational background? George, you want to go first?
I did high school in Hong Kong. I went to Shaolin College, for the people who know what that is. And then I did theoretical physics at Imperial for 3 years. And then I didn't do the integrated masters. Instead, I came to Cambridge to do scientific computing, because I want to pursue nuclear fusion in the future. And that's a good way that's a skill that you will need.
So I went to the same high school as George, Shaolin College in Hong Kong. And I did my undergrad at Imperial in material science and engineering because I already had it in my mind that I kind of wanted to do something in sustainability or like environment, and that seemed like a good route to learning more about like resources and how we use them. And then I realized that I wasn't as interested in like the research aspect, and I wanted to kind of go into more of an applied social kind of aspect of environment and like kind of actually learn more of the core knowledge about like ecology and ecosystems and things like that. And so I looked for a master's in environment and landed on Imperial's environmental technology masters, which is part of their Centre for Environmental Policy. So that's what I'm doing now.
Hello, so I'm from Delhi, India originally. Went to high school at Delhi Public School, Arkipuram. Was fascinated by computers all my life. Got introduced to programming through a friend who introduced me to CS50, which is Harvard's introductory course to programming. And ever since that, I've just loved programming, loved building things. I like coming up with creative solutions to problems. That has been what I've been most interested in. Got to Imperial for computing, really enjoyed my time here, got to learn a lot. And uh, London in general is very finance centric, got introduced to problems that companies face in the financial services, got really hooked onto it, and just looking at the interface between technology and finance to solve problems. And yeah, in that space. So that's been my journey. I like creating solutions.
I am a fourth year in the integrated masters, so the course that George did in theoretical physics. I stayed on for the fourth year. Um, my background is I'm originally from Australia, and I moved overseas and have lived overseas growing up. I went to the Australian International School in Singapore. That's where I finished high school, but I've been to several other schools earlier on than that. And that's where I've started thinking seriously about coming to overseas, primarily to Europe for university, just because a lot of some of my friends from school were considering applying overseas, and I thought I'd give it a shot, and here we are. I think physics for me has just been it's been a roller coaster, but so satisfying. It's everything I wanted it to be. I've always been quite fascinated by the way systems work, and less fascinated by the technological aspect of how systems are built, but understanding fundamentally what are some of the core concepts that go into making a system dynamic or a system functional. And so that's kind of how I got into physics.
So we've heard a lot about like how your personal interests influenced what degree you chose at university. I also wanted to ask if there were other factors that influenced your decision. For example, like family or your peers, or maybe you've considered like job security. Because personally, I went through like a really long period of deciding between degrees due to like family pressures and not really knowing where my interests lied. So, could you guys maybe explain if other factors influenced your decisions?
Firstly, before we go into ours, what do you guys do?
I do computer science, and I've actually always been someone that was pretty like stuck on computer science because I was interested in it from around year 8. So I'm maybe less I really just picked. I maybe less put that much thought into my decision, but yeah.
I study biology, and also like I've always been interested in like biology and like biochemistry in the natural world, but I think also I grew up quite heavily influenced by like what my family thought I should do. So there was a pretty long period of time where I thought I'd do medicine because um, if a lot of viewers are from Hong Kong, they probably know that it's like one of the default routes if you have the grades is that you're expected to do medicine or law or something along the lines. So I wasn't that interested in medicine, I realized, and I didn't want to like lock myself into that path forever. So yeah, I ended up deciding to study biology.
Oh no, that's very cool. And I could kind of talk about this because I had a very wide range of interests and I was, doing decently at a lot of these things. So initially I was very interested in like the fundamental laws behind things. I was going to study either philosophy or physics. So initially I was going to go to Yale to study philosophy, but in the end I didn't pick that route and I came here to do physics. And I think one of the thought behind that was, um, a lot of it did come down to job security, right? Like if you do something like physics, you could still get a decently high paying job at the end if I wasn't that interested. But it's much harder to, you know, do philosophy. It's either, you're like in finance reading books on philosophy or you're a taxi driver learning physics. But I think beyond that, I think it's really important when you're choosing something to pick the major that leaves you the most broad of room. So starting with something more fundamental, you can then go specialize. So if you start with something like physics, you can still go into other engineering, which is sort of what I'm doing now. And I think that's an easier transition than doing something a little bit more applied and going backwards. So I think a really good way to look at it is to keep your options relatively open in a field you still enjoy and then go deeper later. But I do think that a lot of people succumb to the family pressures with something like medicine, especially. But I I would advise against that. I've seen so many people do like 4 years of medicine and then switch off of it. In the end, you have to pick something you enjoy, and then unless it's philosophy, maybe. But no, in general, go for it. I would say.
You want to explain it?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I had a different sort of background where I didn't have as much family pressure, thankfully, and I was far more um, given the onus was on me, and it's banging in my head because my parents drilled it into me since I was about 10, and it's do what you love, be the best at it, and the rest will come. So I think that that's a far better position for me mentally to have than starting like not to worry, particularly things like money and your financial stability at the end, as much as possible, because those things are really, really important. But as much as possible at this stage, that's not really where your focus is going to be if you want that sort of success later on down the track. And I'm working on, and obviously I'm like living this as I'm doing it. So I might have a totally different opinion in 25 years' time, but I've been working under the proviso that I've got to find something that I really love, do as much as I can to be as good at it as possible, and then find a way to make it such that that's solving a problem that someone has. And I think that's sort of a really nice way to take decisions in life, but then also how you want to approach university. There's no point, as George was saying, doing 4 years of medicine. Even if you complete your medical degree and you become a practicing doctor, if you don't love it, you're not going to be one of the best doctors. You've really got to love it. And so if you take that short-sighted approach of, okay, this is what I think I should do, then it might come and bite you in the butt, 10, 15 years down the line.
I generally agree with what you say. I would say growing up in India, uh, there's a lot of pressure to be either an engineer or a doctor. There are the two most focused paths in my country, and it wasn't a problem for me because I love computer science. I have loved programming and really enjoy it. So my parents were absolutely fine with me. My mom didn't like it because she was like, "Your job would be just staring at screens 24 hours a day. You become old and hunched, and I don't want that." So I had to fight that for a bit. She wanted me to do a more traditional engineering, like civil or mechanical. But then, like, that was okay. It was fine. I really had a passion for it. My brother faced a lot of problems though. He had a real passion for economics, wanted to pursue it. And it's not necessarily a problem with my parents, it's a problem with the society in general. They didn't know how to handle someone who wanted to express like their passion for the humanities. Coming from a more science background, literally everyone in my family has been an engineer or a doctor, so that was new for them. They took it very well. They encouraged him. They did force him to do like a double major in mathematics, though. They're like, nah, we're not going to do just economics. And math is just tangential. Just take all applied math courses and get a degree in math. But they did want him to do math. So that was quite interesting. I would say that the mentality is changing, where it's not really that forced upon you anymore. And I feel growing up in a country like India is very meritocratic. Like everything you do is a meritocracy, because there are like so many people who are doing the exact same thing who might be better than you. So you really have to pick something which you can be really good at. Otherwise, you're not going to get any resources or opportunities in the thing you wish to pursue, which I think a lot of people forget or like don't have the nuance to understand. Like, even if you want to become an engineer, if you're not really good at it, you won't have the resources, especially in a country like India, or the opportunities to become the best at it.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Xavier, I was lucky enough to not have that kind of pressure to do like any particular thing from my parents. Um, they were very open to anything. Although my mum wants me to get a stable job and be able to support myself, which is what any parent wants for their child. So my thinking was kind of similar, where like I kind of just went down the route that I wanted to pursue at the time, which was materials. I had quite a lot of influence from school, where I had like a teacher who was very into smart materials and kind of innovations in the sector, and like that really sparked my interest in that side of it. And I kind of was able to see um, what how there was potential to um, make things more efficient and make things more, yeah, sustainable. And so that's how I kind of came to my decision. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like it was always just kind of this idea of like getting a um, getting practical knowledge that I could use to apply to like the general environmental and sustainability issues that we have. That's like kind of always been my goal. And that's how I've kind of based my um, learning and career decisions since leaving school.
Yeah, a very interesting personal reflections for sure. I think one thing that I know that a lot of people struggle with is actually trying to understand and kind of dissect why they like the thing that they do, especially because I know a lot of people that struggled with maybe having an interest in something but not knowing if they'll actually like it when it comes to like in a working environment or in an office environment. So is that something that any of you considered? And like, so Zanna, you mentioned that you got into materials because you had a teacher that was really into it, but is that like something, yeah, is that something you considered, like what it would be like in a working or in a more stressful environment?
I mean, I thought about it a lot in terms of how what jobs I could potentially get and like what I would learn. But I would agree that like it's very different kind of thinking about what you're interested in and then actually going to university and getting a degree in it. I like I enjoyed my degree, but it wasn't necessarily um, the kind of thing that I actually enjoy doing the most. And so I've kind of filled in the gaps with like um, reading outside of my course material and doing things like the uni paper, which are some things that like I'm kind of more passionate about. But I didn't want to, so I thought about doing a journalism degree, but I didn't want to do it as a degree because generally they aren't as marketable. And so like that kind of did play into my decision making. Although I obviously didn't think of it just now. And uh, I think it's important to like kind of recognize that there are some degrees and some routes that will be more practical and will help you develop skills that will get you to a better place in terms of being able to apply them in like any sort of company. And I think um, not to push engineering specifically, but I think engineering and like science degrees tend to have those like a good mixture of those skills, and so um, they tend to be a good option even if as like something that you uh, study and then like are able to kind of use in the future, maybe not even in the same sector. But yeah, so like it's kind of being able to um, recognize that and know that you can still do other things on the side. Um, that's really important. And like definitely go to things like open days. For the masters that I'm doing now, I went to one of their um, like online open days where they kind of explain what the course structure will be like, and they explain the kind of things that you would learn, and that's like actually really really helpful for getting a general picture of what the course will be like. And make sure you read like just course overviews and things like that, because they really do like help, and they really do tell you like roughly what you're going to learn. And I don't think they're trying to deceive their students. They want you to know, like, come in being informed about like what you expect to learn from them and what you expect to get out of the degree. So
I would just like to say that a lot of people, especially when they're younger, equate aptitude with interests, and being really good at it gives you a sort of elation and develops an interest for you in a particular field. So I would say that uh, for people who are genuinely interested in something but don't think they have the aptitude, a lot of it boils down to how hard you work at it. Like I would say initially, programming, computer science in general, I was super interested in it, super interested in how things are built online, but basically had no aptitude for it. Even taking the course, I couldn't solve basic problems, but just sticking with it eventually made me skillful enough that I got a sort of elation in solving difficult problems, and that helped in developing my interest in it, in the field. So if you feel something is cool or interesting, something you want to explore, but you think you don't have the aptitude for it, just sticking with it would eventually develop it. So yeah, and it would be way more meaningful as well.
To, before I ask George a question, just to add on to Tanish's statement, like I started in year 9 and year 8 and year 9, I was in bottom set maths, and now I'm quite good at maths, and so it really does extend for me from my passion for physics, and I very quickly realized in sort of like year 9, 10, okay, if I want to do physics at uni, I'm gonna have to really really bolster my maths, and it was driving through that passion of physics that allowed me to become familiar with maths, and now I love maths. And so I think that is a really great example of it's not always just the students that have always been really, really good at maths typically that then do very well in STEM. You can come bottom up and, it does work. But I was really interested to ask George, because he's now transitioned out of physics. I've decided to stay on for the 4th year, and George has instead decided to go and do a more specialized master's in scientific computing. George, is it because you fell out of love for physics? I don't believe that's the case. But like, why'd you leave me, man?
Bro, it's personal. That's all I'm gonna say. Nah, I'm joking. No, like honestly, I think something that's really important. This is like some old man advice coming from like a 4th year for you freshers. Like, I think having love for a subject is really important, but as you get a little bit older, you kind of realize that perhaps in some ways, just purely when people say passion, they assume you just really enjoy something. But in some ways, that's not really true. I think what passion means is that you see fundamental meaning and value in doing that thing. And I don't think this works for all kinds of people. But I think for people who go to Imperial and people who listen to this podcast, you sort of see this sense of like need to contribute or this kind of mission in life to do something with your life. And I think fundamentally it's really important for that, where you should do something that you see as incredibly important in the world, and you should do some. I think that will push you on, that sense of mission almost, because anything you do will be pretty shitty some days, right? There's going to be days where whatever you do is pretty hard, but when you have this sort of like idea that whatever I'm doing has a meaning, that's really important, because almost whatever you do, you're gonna get to a point, probably I'm gonna do this again in my later in my 20s, where you're like, I actually don't really see a point in what I do. But if it's something that really did mean a lot to you, that will kind of guide you through. So going back to like Xavier's question, no, I loved doing physics with Xavier and the people back in Imperial, and I still really love physics, but I think that for me, like learning about the universe to a lot of people has so much meaning, but for me that was a lot of interest. But for me, I wanted to do something that had like a practical benefit to the world, and physics does, but that's more down the line. I want to do something more immediate. And for me, that was studying nuclear fusion, which is this really potent energy source that's really important for sustainability in the future. And to do that, I had to go learn something that was more applicable to that, which is why I decided to focus on this specialized masters.
Yeah, and I think although my modules and my master's dissertation are very, very separate. I'm doing like theoretical physics day to day, so I'm taking things like quantum field theory, quantum information, very fundamental things. But my master's thesis is on climate risk modeling, and so I think that's a really great example of where just because your degree says you should be doing one thing, university, if you find those opportunities or you seek out those opportunities, you can really tailor your experience to how you want, and being able to keep in mind that impact and making sure that what you're doing you feel is impactful, as George was saying, can really take you through the days where I'm very deep in an integral and I'm like, why am I doing this? It's the impact, and it's thinking, I get to go home and I get to play with climate models and I get to play with things that I think I can get some real value out of, and that's kind of what gets me through. I guess it's a little bit sad, but I love it.
There is also a bit of caveat to what I said. It's like it's not everything you do needs to contribute to an overarching goal, and there are interests you should pursue. But it's just like overall in a longer time span that maybe having a thread through what you're doing would help.
Also, just to mention about the corporate environment in your question, I would say any corporate environment you join, any team you join, they would have very interesting problems, provided you have an interest in the corporate environment you joined and the problems they tend to solve. They would have very interesting problems, and for some reason, no one would take care or try to solve them. So, just having an interest in the sort of problems they solve would give you a leg up in coming up with creative solutions or being exposed to problems that are of general interest to you.
Why don't I go the spicy question for Tanish first, because he just finished talking about corporate. Well, I've got an interesting question for you, Tanish. I know this is a sustainability podcast, but I also know that you, Tanish, are not pursuing sustainability anymore going forward, and or not directly. And so I'd be really interested to know what drove you away from sustainability. You participated in a few events that are sustainability focused. I think it'd be great to find out, why aren't you still doing it? And what are some things that we can take away?
I mean, that's a great question. I would say that I'm still 100% committed to sustainability and carbon-free built environment. Uh, there are some things that I fundamentally disagree with the movement currently. I feel that the movement doesn't take into account the hardships that real and common people would face if certain changes or regulations are put in place. It kind of glosses over the actual impact that it might have on people's livelihoods, people's current occupations, and I feel those people need to be heard. Another thing that I feel is being looked over is that now that the developing countries like China and India are catching up with developed countries in terms of development, they would feel that the goalpost continuously keeps shifting. First, it was that they're not developed enough. Now it's that they're not sustainable enough. Where is the line drawn? And these countries might genuinely have a really deep problem with respecting the West's ideals on this. And finally, I feel that a person can contribute to diversity, equity, inclusion in any way, and they can contribute to sustainability in any way they can possibly, and any small bit counts. I have participated in events in my corporate life where I have gone through to help the world develop into a more sustainable environment, to help people who have been impacted by these developments, and to ensure that people are having like are taken care of in any of these situations.
Very well answered.
I think that's yeah, like it's a very important point, and I think it comes down to kind of this stigma and like almost the opposite message that a lot of people are getting in terms of climate change activism and um, sustainability goals, and um, there's so much kind of like negative um, messaging about like who's to blame and who um, is responsible for like then mitigating change the climate change and to like actually come up with solutions. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about like the presentation of sustainability and how it's like presented in the media and things. And I think it's just become such a like sensational thing where it really like doesn't have to be as big a kind of problem as it is. Like fundamentally, it's about how we kind of approach living, and there's so many other things that kind of play into this idea of sustainability and climate change that like just aren't considered. Things like how we manage our waste, which is something that I'm very passionate about. I think there's so many things where like you can choose an option that like doesn't have waste, and it actually doesn't like affect you. It's just that we have this mindset of like um oh, we need these things or we want these things, and we're so influenced by like marketing that we end up like kind of not being able to think on our own. And I think it's really important that people like are just educated in general in these ideas, and that they know like the actual impacts that things are having, as opposed to like the general um, climate change is a negative thing. Because um, things like the developing world, where we are seeing them struggle to kind of keep up with like the raising standards of the increasing standard of like what it is to be a developed country, and like how to fit into kind of this Western ideal. Um, it's all just about how things are being portrayed. Um, there's a real gap for like effective sustainability communication and science communication in general. Um, and so yeah, I think that's a really big issue, and um, I really want to like kind of bring light to that and try and make people understand that um, you need to sometimes you need to seek out these things and seek out this information, and it's like it kind of is difficult, but it's important that everyone's like trying to be on the same page. Um, but anyway, yeah, sorry, for distracting everyone. Um, and yeah, it's just really sad that like so many people are being turned away by things like um, even like activism in general. So I know so many people that um, are kind of put off the idea of um, stopping using fossil fuels, just because some activists are so extreme that it like just puts regular people off. And in that sense, like things that we are doing, going to uni and getting our degrees, that are like a little bit more passive in a way, but are kind of going with the flow and trying to find real solutions to these problems, I think is so much more important than necessarily like being the loudest voice in the room and being the most vocal about these issues. Like attention is one thing, but actually being able to solve problems is another. Um, yeah.
I would also like to point out that tech companies are having higher carbon emissions this year than they have had ever in the last 2, 3 years, because of the race to develop AIs, which is generating a higher compute power. But they are still carbon neutral, but you have to ask that they're using a lot of water, they're using a lot of carbon as compared to previous years. Is that worth it in terms of development of AI? And are we going to see more and more of this carbon emission from companies? Important question.
Just to touch back on Zanna's point about it's quite unfortunate that a lot of regular people are turned off from the negative attention. I also feel like a lot of people tend to not want to support these sorts of things because they don't want to think about it, and so they try to take a neutral stance of, okay, I will not support this, but I will not support this because I don't want to actually think about the impact this is having. And I feel like that is kind of exacerbated by what we were talking about last podcast, by of like having these time deadlines of like, okay, there's a deadline, but I don't want to think about it, so I will not actually do anything.
Thank you so much for your responses. I think that our listeners would be able to take a lot of like valuable insight away. So we have one final question, and that is, what advice do you have for our listeners who want to join the sustainability industry, and what job opportunities exist in this field? Maybe we could start with George.
Sure. I think that the field is ever growing, but I think there's always the general advice, and also I think the other speakers here will be better at giving industry specific advice. But I just think that it's really important earlier on that if you're really trying to help with the sustainability mission, you think about where you would come in. Because there's the typical, I mean, there's the like very important but more traditional entry points, which is like, engineering related, or even what I'm doing, like scientific. But I think with today's world, there's a lot more subtle points that are very needed, such as, from a more humanity or economics background, where it's what we were talking about in the previous episode, where it's about describing what the mission is, describing what success looks like, helping to bridge what sustainability looks like between different countries. And I think there's roles like this that are perhaps neglected more, but there are these niches that are really important. And I think another really big thing is being able to be cross-disciplinary. If you have a background in something, but you have a passion in something else, that is very, very needed today. And or if you're multicultural, you're from this country, but also from this other country, I think it's leveraging these advantages that you have to help with this mission.
Yeah, I agree really strongly with that point about being multidisciplinary. I think the kind of what we've kind of moved towards as a society was to have like these specific jobs where you follow a career path, particularly in Hong Kong. You tend to have people who look for like the most secure job and they just want to stay in there in that like um, career path, like law or medicine, finance, engineering, um, stay in a company for a long time, have a stable career, and have a stable income. But in sustainability, that's not how it is. I mean, even personally at the moment, I'm still struggling to figure out like where I want to go. Just because there's so many different routes you can take, and uh, that's okay. Like there are loads of options, and because it's a growing sector and it's an area that needs problem solvers and needs young people, there's always going to be new jobs coming up. Like people are talking about the green jobs revolution, where like basically so many companies and so many governments need people who know about sustainability and know about the environment to come and advise them and come and help them figure out what to do strategy wise. That like they there's always going to be these like job openings coming up. Um, Particularly at the moment, the big ones are like consulting, engineering still, and like research in general. Um, those tend to be what people go for in the industry. Consulting is like the really big one, I think, and Xavier can attest to this. But yeah, like I think um, it's important that you keep your options open, as we've been saying, and like it's really, really useful to just have backgrounds in different things and be able to kind of adapt to particular situations, um, and use different kinds of skills, like not just a STEM career. Like it's so useful to be like personable and to have those social skills as well as the technical side, because then you can actually communicate what you're doing to other people and actually share your ideas. And that's like way more important than just being able to come up with like a new technology or like being able to innovate. Not that that isn't important in itself. Um, but yeah, I'll pass on to Xavier because
I'm going to give some very specific advice. I'm going to say that your degree will prepare you for about 5 to 10% of the content that you're going to need to be familiar with if you're moving into sustainability. So it's really important to read and be reading about disclosure standards that companies have to abide by, what they will have to abide by. Fantastic one is TCFD for climate risk, which is a global recommendation that will soon be replaced by CSRD, which will be a European or an EU mandate. And because lots of big companies are global and do operate in Europe, they will have to abide by that. Looking at sustainability pathways, how we can tackle climate risk and manage climate opportunities. And then understanding that ESG is currently a bit of a box statement for a specific function within a business, but it's going to be more and more transcendental throughout a business. And so still remaining conscious that being in Tanish's case and people that aren't as interested in sustainability as a core function, you're going to have to become familiar with sustainability. And it's really important that coming outside in, people that are really crucial, really fascinated by sustainability understand how that links to everything else. And so just being able to read and get up to date on, what is COP, what are the things that are facing, what are the main problems that are facing companies now, and be specific. Try and get some specific examples about industries, firms, people, research of where sustainability is going, climate, nature, product development, manufactured goods, that type of thing. And what that'll do is it'll give you a better framework for what am I actually interested in, rather than just sustainability. Be specific and be purposeful.
So the one advice I have for incoming students, for people in any age bracket, is to get as much exposure as you possibly can. I feel exposure leads to a lot of different paths, develops your knowledge, and basically helps you identify what you want to do. So exposure would be my one key advice. In terms of sustainability and the job openings there, I think you should follow your passion. If your passion leads to something which isn't in the sustainability field, then you can effectively just then you can effectively contribute in any other way. So a lot of these companies, as Xavier mentioned, would need to be aware of what ESG looks like and like somehow be more efficient. You can contribute to that. You can contribute meaningfully by volunteering. There are a lot of ways to contribute, and every contribution counts. In terms of other pathways, my brother recently did an internship at a think tank, which helps the government of India make energy distribution more efficient and carbon friendly. So that's one way you can leverage your skill, be part of think tanks, advise governments, and things like that. He found it really rewarding, and it was really meaningful to him. And yeah, there are a lot of ways to contribute. So I would just say gain as much exposure as you can and do what you feel you're passionate for.
if I can add one more thing, just to wrap up everything we've said, I think a lot of the time things can feel very depressing in the sustainability industry and in the environmental industry. And I'm sure all four of us have come across this at some point and felt like a little bit dismal. And I feel like even in this conversation, we've covered some topics where like things seem very hopeless. And I just want to say, like, it's not. And there's so many people working out there to do like good things, positive things, and making positive changes. And it's important to like, that's why the reading is so important as well, to like actually see where all these good things are happening. Because if you just read the news, all you get is what like the media wants you to know and what makes people kind of read more and makes them kind of scared. But there's so many outlets where like rewilding is being effective, and certain species are bouncing back. A lot of climate change mitigation measures are like really successful as well, and they are being implemented in a lot of places. And so it's just very important to stay optimistic, and that carries into like looking for jobs and kind of following your degree. You need to stay optimistic, and you need to be hopeful that you can contribute and make a difference. And so, yeah, that's my last little bit.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Zanna, George, Xavier, and Tanish for a great series. And thank you for SustainaPod listeners for tuning in this week with us.
Thanks, guys.
This is just the beginning of the SustainaPod Imperial Branch. If you're interested in joining us, reach out, DM us at @SustainaPod_Imperial on Instagram. Until next time, see you guys, and thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having us.